I'm Alaa Alsaraji. I'm an artist and facilitator, and I'm the artist in resident for the Stay Home collection at the Museum of the Home. I'm a visual artist, and in my practice I try and use mainly illustrations as a medium to explore themes of identity and belonging, and kind of setting that in the larger socioeconomic context that we live in. So I've got a complex relationship to home, because I've lived in like 3 different countries. I've lived like across 2 different continents, and I think this is my 14th like house or flat that I've been in my life. So this side of the wall are photographs that I took on my first trip to Iraq. So at 26, it was the first time I got to see where my parents are from. But because of war and displacement, they ended up in Iran, and that's where I was born. And because of kind of the hostile situation towards Iraqis there, we ended up moving to Austria and seeking refuge in Europe. And because of the very kind of racist circumstances there, we felt that we really need to get out of here again. So that's when we moved to London, and finally found like some sort of community, especially for my parents here. And I think this is the most settled this whole family has ever felt. The theme of the installation is to respond to the research that has been conducted around the experiences of home within the pandemic. And the idea is that it explores the themes on different levels. So on the floor level, where we have the rug designs, it looks at people's experiences of home, especially in terms of rituals of care they've developed for themselves during lockdown and throughout the pandemic. The community researchers that have worked on the project, as well as the whole project team, we've all been really clear about our support for taking down the statue of a slave owner, Sir Robert Jeffrey, at the Museum of the Home, and wanting to use this exhibition as a way to be able to address it. The icon of a statue crossed out is supposed to kind of symbolize and kind of visually address within the artwork. So these are designs for a rug that I will be making, and it's based on interviews where people talked about rituals of care that they've adopted over lockdown. And this one in particular is around activities people have adopted indoors. So one of them is a person doing yoga, and the other one is a bowl of hot water with feet being put into it. And that one in particular was around one woman talking about an old Chinese tradition where you put your feet in hot water, and that's kind of meant to be really healing and calming, and she talked about how she adopted that. This rug I've made a pot with some hot food in it, kind of above the stove, and this one was inspired by the interviews where people talked about really getting into healthy eating and cooking over lockdown. And also one person talked about how food was kind of like the only comfort that you could really go to over lockdown. So that was kind of one of the only things you are allowed to leave the house for.
Going out and getting food, and so that's what you're going to do, and so your food becomes all like, you know, your reward of the day, the thing to look forward to.
I kind of just went for a really generic looking big pot that could feed like the whole family and the neighbours too. So this was the first rug I actually made, and this one is really inspired by what a lot of people talked about in the interviews, which is a form of self-care or care for others that they've adopted, which is to be actually distant and not touch. And there was a really moving interview where someone talked about caring for their elderly mother but not being able to hug them, and kind of having to explain, like, my way of showing love right now is to be distant and to be not near you and not to come visit you, and which is something that's really unnatural to us and really heartbreaking at times, but that's probably something that most people can relate to.
Because before I would have hugged my mum, I can't do that really. So I have to communicate my feelings for her without touching her, you know, and that's very strange.
I was living with my mum and dad during lockdown in West London, and I think one of the hardest things was not seeing my nephew. I think he was only 3 when lockdown started. He's 5 now. So it was really interesting having to explain to a really young kid that he can't hug his grandparents, and he was like really scared as well. The first time where it was kind of okay to see each other again, I kind of said to him like, "Oh, come give me a hug," and he said, "No, corona." And I said, "Do you think I have corona right now?" And he said, "No, I have it." It was so heartbreaking to hear, like a 3-4-year-old say, "No, I might be killing you, I might be a carrier." This is probably my favorite rug because nothing went wrong in the process of making this. There was always something going wrong with the gun or the thread or something with the other ones, but this one just came out really nicely. And this one was inspired by people talking about adopting gardening and being in green spaces over lockdown as a form of caring for themselves and having an activity to do. So this one in particular, one woman talked about how her and her husband started growing tomatoes over lockdown, and how that kind of gave them so much joy and energy. And she said that they would like wake up in the morning and the first thing they do is run down and check on the tomatoes, and they see so much joy when there's a new one growing. So I thought that was a really, really nice visual to kind of go with the general theme of gardening and bringing greenery into your home as a way of caring for yourself.
We had lots of tomatoes, and that was actually one of my biggest case of happiness when you see a rush in the morning to the garden and say, "Oh, there's another new tomato."
And also a lot of people talked about cycling and either starting cycling over lockdown or getting back into it or getting more serious about it, and just being able to see just a lot of people do more exercises or do more outdoor activities locally around them. I actually found it very, very difficult to motivate myself to do anything creative over lockdown. But I think what I got good at is just allowing that to happen and being okay with not being 100% productive all the time, and kind of just acknowledging that there's a pandemic and it's not easy and you can't be giving 100% all the time while something so major is going on around us. For myself, just coming out of the pandemic, I just want to kind of take away that I make a space a home regardless of how long I've been in it or how long I will be in it, and kind of just acknowledging that investing into a space is worth it, and it makes such a difference whether you think of a space as your home, or if you just think about it as it's a temporary means to an end, which is kind of how I always used to think about where I live until now.
So I'm particularly intrigued by the image on the small rug of a seated figure who looks as though they're sitting in a relaxed but pose, possibly in a sort of yoga pose, and underneath it's the bowl with possibly hands or maybe feet. Look as though they're washing to me. So I thought that this was an image of the home as a place of practicing spiritual development or life. And I think during COVID, when we haven't been able to go out and join our spiritual faith communities together, that's caused us to think about our home as a place where we practice our spiritual life if we feel we have one. And my understanding from the broad information that we've got is that Black and minority ethnic communities have suffered much worse, partly because of the workplaces that they're exposed to and their need to go out to work, and partly because of perhaps historical concerns about medical practice and medical interventions in those communities. And just that little symbol there on the rug just reminds you that COVID in the home is more than just the home. It's about impact across our communities.
When you look up and you look at the walls, you can see interpretations of what the future of home could look like and what people envision a utopian version of home could be.
So the first thing I saw about this installation that I really liked was the plants in the room and just like the life that I saw as soon as I walked in. I aspire to be a plant mom eventually. I just have fake plants now. But it reminded me of my mother because during lockdown, like she was outside in our backyard all the time. She would come home like every weekend with new plants and like mulch to put in the garden back in the backyard. And it was funny because I have a younger sister and she would always like force us to come outside and help her. But I really saw that as a way for my mom to kind of like get out of the house and like have something that was her own to like tend to plants.
But I also really enjoy the artwork because each one I connect to differently. So for example, this one talks about affordable housing and sustainability, which throughout lockdown was a big issue because so many people lost their jobs or were made redundant or furloughed. And then this one reminds me of my family, so like the display here of photos reminds me of how, because I couldn't see any of my family, they all live in Scotland or abroad, I got to I'd have my photos out all the time and I would speak to them via the Zoom or whatever, so that's what this one reminds me of.
I like reading the postcards because it just shows like what everybody experienced during the lockdown and how they helped themselves.
This is a response from the prompt that is, what should homes be like in the future? This is what this person drew, and it's powered by solar energy and wind energy. So this is someone sort of like imagining home for the future in a very futuristic kind of way.
I guess what isn't covered is perhaps how the government handled the pandemic, which perhaps would be good to have that incorporated.
I think it's missing, I think there was a lot of technology, there was a lot of laptops, phones, iPads, TVs everywhere to keep you entertained. Yeah. And then there was a switch off once I hit the point of finishing work, and then it changed to I was having drinks indoors with your family that you wouldn't normally do and things like that. So there was a social aspect to it.
For me, I think from my experience of lockdown, it's missing a bit of comfort. I think a lot of lockdown for me was really getting comfortable in the space. And even though it does have some comfortability, things like the pillows and things, I think having these, what would you call them? I guess planks or crates, pallets. I don't think they necessarily show me any comfort, and I think lockdown, that was a big thing for me. I don't think I've laid with a blanket for so long, for so many days in a row.
And what was really striking is that actually the most common themes are, again, really essential things. It's that homes should be they should be safe and they should be affordable and there should be a right for everyone, which isn't this kind of like grand utopian idea. It's really just a very basic thing, especially for our generation, to own your own home. So what many people might think is a very basic thing is actually becoming a unrealistic, hopeful dream.